Hi, time for another Meepology moment. In this video, we're going to highlight some of the most commonly used mechanics in board games to help new players understand how they are used and some examples of games that focus heavily on them. As always, you can visit Meepology.com and find out what games fit your personality. Many of the games on your list will utilize one or more of these mechanics. Here is the list of some of the most common mechanics found in board games, in no particular order. Area control. Players compete to control the most territory or resources on the board. Some popular board games that focus on area control include Risk. Players control armies and attempt to conquer territories on a world map. Axis and Allies, a World War II themed game where players control different world powers and attempt to gain control of various territories. Small World. Players control fantasy races and attempt to expand their territories by conquering neighboring lands. Catan. Players control settlers and attempt to expand their settlements across the island of Catan by building roads and cities. Carcassonne. Players control medieval characters and attempt to gain control of the landscape by placing tiles and meeples on the board. Ticket to Ride. Players control train companies and attempt to gain control of routes across a map of North America or other variants and expansions. A Game of Thrones, the board game. Players control the great houses of Westeros and attempt to gain control of territories and castles. Terra Mystica. Players control fantasy races and attempt to build structures and gain control of land. The next one is deck building. Deck building games are a type of card game where players start with a small deck of cards and through the course of the game add new cards to their deck to make it more powerful. Some popular board games that focus on deck building include Dominion. Players start with a small deck of cards and use them to buy new, more powerful cards to add to their deck. Star Realms. Players start with a small deck of cards representing a space fleet and use them to acquire new ships and bases to add to their deck. Legendary, a Marvel deck building game. Players start with a small deck of cards representing heroes and villains from the Marvel Universe and use them to acquire new heroes and villains to add to their deck. Clanks. Players start with a small deck of cards representing thieves and use them to acquire new equipment and abilities to add to their deck. Arkham Horror, the card game. Players start with a small deck of cards representing investigators and use them to acquire new weapons, allies, and other cards to add to their deck. Eminent Domain. Players start with a small deck of cards representing planets and use them to acquire new planets and ships to add to their deck. Deck building games are becoming more popular among gamers, and many games are released every year that incorporate this mechanic. Number 3, dice rolling. Dice rolling is a game mechanic where players use dice to determine the outcome of different actions or events in the game. This creates an element of chance, and players need to find strategies based on the roll of the die. Some popular games that feature dice rolling include the original Monopoly. Players roll dice to move their pieces around the board and take different actions based on that roll. Risk. Players roll dice to determine the outcome of battles and take control of territories. And of course, Yahtzee. Players roll dice to try to get certain combinations in order to score points. Arkham Horror. Players roll dice to determine the outcome of different actions and encounters. Many games feature dice rolling as a game mechanic. It's a classic game element that has been around for centuries. It's common in strategic, adventure, and exploration games. where players need to strategize based on the roll of the dice and make decisions based on the outcome. Dice rolling can be found in different types of games, from classic board games to modern games and even video games. Number 4, hand management. Hand management is a game mechanic where players need to manage the cards or other resources they have in their hand in order to achieve a goal. Some popular board games that focus on hand management include Race for the Galaxy. Players start with a small hand of cards representing different planets and technologies, and use them to build a galactic civilization. 7 Wonders. Players start with a small hand of cards representing different ancient civilizations, and use them to build their own civilization. Puerto Rico. Players start with a small hand of cards representing different roles, and use them to build up their own colony on the island of Puerto Rico. Power Grid. Players start with a small hand of cards representing different power plants and use them to build their own power network. Glory to Rome. Players start with a small hand of cards representing different resources and use them to build up their own Roman city. Hand management is a common game mechanic in many games. Number 5, point-to-point movement. Point-to-point movement is a game mechanic where players move their pieces or tokens from one location on the board to another. Some popular board games that focus on point-to-point movement include Transamerica. Players move their train pieces along routes on a map of the United States to connect different cities and earn points. Age of Steam. Players move their train pieces along routes on a map of North America to connect different cities and earn points. Are you noticing a theme here? Railways of the World. Players move their train pieces along routes on maps of the world to connect different cities and earn points as well. Alright, enough on train games. Many games feature point-to-point movements as mechanics, and it's common in any type of transportation and logics-themed game. But it can also be found in other games, like war games, where players move their pieces across the map, such as Flames of War or Bolt Action. Number 6, set collection. Set collection is a game mechanic where players collect specific sets of cards or other resources in order to achieve a goal. The sets may have certain criteria such as certain numbers, colors, or attributes, and players need to collect the right set in order to score points. Some popular board games that focus on set collection include Rummy. Players collect sets of cards of the same rank or in sequential order to score points. Rummacube. Players collect set of tiles with the same number on the sequential order to score points. San Juan. Players collect sets of cards with different types of attributes to score points as well. Many games feature collections as a mechanic. It is a common card game attribute, but it can also be found in other games, like board games where players collect specific sets of pieces rather than cards. As always, you can visit Meepology.com and find out what games fit your personality.